Have you managed to get the show notes printed off and whatnot?
Yes, all sorted. All 17 pages of them or whatever it is.
Well, good.
Okay. We have coffee. We have water.
I haven't got coffee. The kids drank all the milk.
Ah, bloody kids.
I know. Sacrilege.
Do you not have emergency dust in the house just in case?
I haven't got anything. But never mind. I'll survive.
Survive without coffee. It's going to be a rough show.
I've got water. I'll survive. I've had a coffee, so it's not like I haven't had my morning coffee. I would be just a kind of dribbling mess on the floor if I hadn't had my morning coffee.
Yeah, I understand. I will, not a black coffee man.
No, well, absolute emergency, I probably would, but I'd rather not. Milk and one for me.
Okie doke.
Across the board, tea or coffee, but prefer coffee. Good stuff. How are you?
Not too bad, thank you. Not too bad. Yeah, busy. Got me Graco sprayer back on Monday. In the nick of time. Well, I would have preferred to have it back on Friday, and then I could have got some of this stuff done over the weekend. But
yeah,
it's busy. Got a lot going on. Oh God, clients decided that I said I'd try and get it in by the end of the month. She said, "Oh, any time before Christmas." So I'll try and get it in by the end of November, and then it gives me a clear couple of weeks to do the other stuff that I've got to do before Christmas. And I said, "Look, I'm really sorry. The paint's still going to be a bit soft by Friday. Can we? Oh well, maybe December the 14th." She says, "What? I can't have this stuff hanging around in the workshop for another couple of weeks."
Yeah, it's like just put your life on hold.
Yeah, it looks like I'm going in not this weekend, unfortunately, but the weekend after. So I'll still have it hanging around for a week, which is a bit of a headache. So there goes my plan of pre-building some of it to make for an easy install.
Nothing goes according to plan.
Never does.
Should we do the intro?
Let's do that. Welcome back to the Measuring Up Podcast, episode 18. Yes, 18, old enough to drink, drive and vote, although probably not all at the same time. Measuring Up is the UK's first, and as far as we know, only commercial joinery podcast. I'm Peter Millard, and as well as running a virtual 10-minute workshop on YouTube, I also run a very much real-life carpentry and cabinet-making business in the garden spot of West London.
And I'm Andy MacLellan, and I run the Gosforth Handyman YouTube channel, and I also have a cabinetry and joinery business up in Newcastle upon Tyne.
Every couple of weeks, we get together in our internet cafe and we have a chat about all the topics of the day that are important to us: religion, politics, climate change, and transgender issues. These are all issues that we steer well clear of, as we'd much rather chat about glues and screws or whatever's been suggested by you, our fantastic listeners. But before we get into all that, Andy Mac, how have you been?
I've been very well, thank you, but it's been a difficult week. It's been a very, very busy week, and I've dropped you an email about a couple of things offline, but I don't mind touching on it a little bit. But I'll not go into the nitty gritty of it.
No, it's difficult personal family stuff, and everybody goes through a certain amount of it, and I feel for you, as I said in the email.
It's one of those things that literally, unless you're going to live forever, someone's going to have to deal with what happens to all your stuff at the fateful day, and everyone's going to have to go through this for their own parents and your own kids if you've got them, or family members are going to have to go through it for you at some point. And
yes, indeed,
it's a very it is. Just to give a little bit of background, my mum is now in a home, and she's been in a home for the last couple of years, and she's got dementia and Parkinson's and isn't very well, and it's to the point now where she doesn't know who our own family members are anymore. She doesn't know where she is, which is kind of good in a way, because she's happy and she's not upset and she just sleeps most of the time.
But it's no life, is it?
No, it's not. She's, that's another whole thing. And she's in a little room that's probably about a third of the size of the studio room that I'm in at the minute, probably about a third of the size of my workshop, if that.
Yeah.
And that's where she spends her life, in a wheelchair. She can't move, she can't do anything for herself, and that is her life now. But I've always had it at the back of my mind that we're going to have to do something with her house that has been sitting vacant for a long time now.
Yeah.
And there's lots of hoops that you've got to jump through and things before you're even allowed to touch the property and things like that.
Yep.
But it can't just sit there empty forever. The property is starting to kind of eat itself. You know, it's amazing how quickly a property starts to deteriorate when there's no one living in it.
Yes, absolutely.
Little things that don't cross your mind, like within the first 6 months, mould just started appearing everywhere.
Because the windows aren't open, there's no airflow through it.
Yeah.
You know,
There's no airflow, and literally would be going back to the property every week or so just to check everything's okay. But gradually, everything in the house just started covering itself in a thin film of mould, spores and dust.
Yeah.
Because, as you say, there's no airflow or anything. So then you have to take that into account and making sure, you know, central heating's coming on and all that. So we're finally starting to clear out. And my mum, she's a hoarder. There's no getting away from the fact that she's a hoarder.
That's where you get it from, right?
Well, yeah. And my dad never was. So it was always a bit of a kind of, you know, catch-22 between them in terms of my mum wanted to keep everything. My dad was very, very organised. So I'm quite organised, but I do hoard. And it's not until you get a week like this where you go through the contents of someone's life from the last 50 years or whatever, and you realise how much stuff there is that just goes in the bin. You know, you can't take it with you.
Yeah. All the things that were precious to them don't really mean anything to you because they're, you know, other than the fact that your mum or your dad owned them.
Yeah.
They are their mementos, not yours. It's a funny situation, strange situation.
And there's so much, and there's a lot of lovely stuff, but you can't keep it all because you just, you know, you've already got a family and house, and you can't add double the amount of furniture in, so you can't keep it all, and most of it is of no value whatsoever. And of a 3-bedroom semi-detached suburban house, the only stuff vaguely of value, and even then it's highly dubious whether it's of any value whatsoever, fitted into the boot of my wife's Fiesta. Everything else in the property, because we don't want to leave anything valuable, any valuables are going off into secure storage and whatnot, but we can't leave valuable things in the house, because when a house is left vacant, it's very difficult to get insurance for the contents of the house.
Yes, of course.
So you can't leave anything of value there. So anything like that has to go off to secure storage.
Yeah.
But just things like, I mean, this afternoon, there's 10 bin liners full of confidential waste. Just, you know, bank statements dating back to the 1970s.
Yeah.
And it's too much. You can't shred that amount of stuff yourself. You can't put it in the bin. You can't leave it for house clearance people. So we've got this afternoon, there's a specialist shredding company coming over just to do all the shredding. And so it's been a week. That was the other thing this morning. Sorry, I'm completely dominating the conversation, but then I'll shut up.
That's all right.
I don't normally do the school run on a Friday. It's normally my wife. My wife's off on a Friday. So a Friday morning is normally either podcast or in the workshop or at a customer site. But as it happened, this morning was the only time that the council could go to my mum's house to pick up all of the OT equipment. And there's literally a garage worth of wheelchairs, Zimmer frames, walking stick, all the type of mobility stuff that builds up over the years. And there's a garage full of that stuff. And the only time the council could come out was this morning. So my wife's had to go over to the property this morning to wait for the council to arrive to pick all this stuff up. Yeah. Which means that I had to do the school run. So, which meant, am I going to be late for the podcast? Luckily, it was got in by the nick of in the nick of time. So, as a result of all of that, and because I knew I would be doing that work for this whole week, and my wife has been amazing and helped us with, she's done a huge amount of the work on it at the property, just doing all the clearance work. And as a result, there's been no time to do videos. So the last couple of weeks I've had to get a backlog of videos done in advance because I knew I would have no time to get videos done over these couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But there's light at the end of the tunnel. Things are pretty much done. We now just need to get a house clearance company to come out, and we need to pay a lot of money to get everything remaining, which is all just junk, taken away. And it does really focus the mind on hoarding. And I know that I can be bad. I'm not terrible, and my mum wasn't terrible. You know, I've seen a lot worse.
Yeah.
But it does focus the mind on, you know, you can't take it with you, and someone's going to have to deal with that problem at some point. And it's an interesting one. But yeah, light at the end of the tunnel. But I don't want to. I don't want to be a downer on things, but purely from a hoarding perspective, I think it's quite an interesting topic because...
Absolutely, yeah, fascinating. I'm just going to give a quick shout out to my dad, actually, who's 93. We had a family shindig a couple of weeks ago, and he moved into sheltered housing, sheltered accommodation as a specifically for this very reason. Mum and Dad got rid of an awful lot of their stuff when they moved out of their little house. They moved into sheltered housing. Lost my mum a couple of years ago. Under sort of not quite similar, but not the same circumstances. And my dad is thankfully 93, in good health. He's got a nice, warm, small but really nice apartment. He's got cricket on the telly. He's got YouTube on his computer. He's got a massive Tesco a few minutes walk away, so he can go for a cool down in the air conditioning in summer, or go for a walk. And he's very content, and they both deliberately did this. They actually did a massive downsize and just got rid of as much as they possibly could when they moved into the sheltered accommodation.
That's the way to do it.
For exactly that reason, yeah.
That is absolutely the way to do it. And unfortunately, with my mum, the dementia had kicked in too much, even while she was still living at the property. But that is absolutely the way to go. And, and it means as well that you can kind of enjoy your life a bit and not have to worry about the upkeep of a giant house that you're rattling around in. And
I mean, it's it's not all perfect plain sailing. There's all kinds of niggles with where he is. Apparently, it was the people who worked there all worked for a former council care home kind of thing, and you can tell, the whole attitude is one of difficulty. Can't possibly sign for an Amazon package that implies some kind, even though there's a reception desk staffed all during daylight hours. They flat refuse to take responsibility to sign for any packages, or they wouldn't even. My dad needed a witness signature on something, and they had to take it up to management before it came back down, and they refused. So it's all a bit sort of infuriating in that regard. However, he is happy enough and perfectly content with how things are. So yeah.
Well, that's the main thing. Well, I'm glad he's sorted. So, hello to Peter's dad if you're listening to this. Does he ever listen to podcasts? Or?
Yeah, he's a subscriber. He's a Patreon supporter. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic!
And you can also support the podcast at patreon.com/10minute/measuringuppodcast.com.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's enlightening. It really is. And I think the thing is as well. I mean, we've briefly discussed, especially in this kind of business, you have to hoard to a degree because you've got to keep supplies of wood and bits, and there's nothing more annoying than chucking something in the bin that you then have to go out and buy again the next week.
That's a whole other topic, isn't it?
Absolutely. So
I think I had it down as a potential topic, actually. Why do you never end up with the offcuts that you need?
Yeah, and it's true. And, I could have another workshop the size of my workshop just to store... Just
for storage.
Wood.
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
to store wood and nothing else.
Absolutely.
And I would fill it instantly, Yep. I mean, it would make life so much easier if I could get a big delivery of sheet materials and just always have a stock in. But I can't keep more than 2 or 3 sheets in at a time because I just haven't got the space. And yeah, that's another whole thing. But
yeah, I am very fortunate that I've got a really good timber yard, literally 5 minutes away from where I live, where the workshop is, and they do precision board cutting. So they effectively are my stock room. You know, it's not as convenient as getting it and cutting it yourself, but in many ways it's better because you don't have the hassle or responsibility or the investment in stock come to that of a whole ton of stuff. What you do end up with, there's an awful lot of offcuts, which, as you know, they seem to breed.
Yeah. I'm still juries because, I mean, for softwoods and stuff, I tend to just keep them and they get chucked on. If they've not been painted or treated or anything, they just get chucked on the chimney if we're having like a bit of a burny night out in the garden, or if we're having a bit of a barbecue or something, you know, they'll get burned at some point.
Yeah.
I don't think you're really supposed to burn MDF, although I have read conflicting reports on that because...
Yeah, as with all MDF, there's so many conflicting reports about everything, isn't there? I don't know if the fumes are toxic or what. I'd imagine it burns hot enough to nullify any nastiness, but I don't really know.
Yeah, well, I've heard that there's factories that run off burning the offcut, like, you know, furniture factories and stuff that run off burning the offcuts of these kind of things. So
yeah, my timber yard burns it, so, you know.
Yeah, so I would love to know if anyone, and this, I don't want to hear from anyone who's an MDF hater who's just going to, you can't burn it, it'll kill you instantly.
You can't cut it, it's going to kill you instantly.
You can't cut it, you can't touch it because it's leaching formaldehyde constantly. If you genuinely have some sort of scientific knowledge of whether or not it's safe to burn something that contains formaldehyde, or it was manufactured using formaldehyde, and then obviously it depends whether or not you've got low formaldehyde MDF and all these new products that are coming out as well. But
yeah, fun fact, by the way, I had an MDF anti-MDF ranter in my comments recently. Amongst many other ranters in my comments, we'll come to those in the after show. But I found a great UK health and safety part of the website which dealt with formaldehyde and MDF, and it's really interesting to read it. Moisture-resistant MDF does not use formaldehyde. Is used as we've probably touched on this topic already, and I don't want to repeat ourselves. But MDF has used formaldehyde as a binding agent in times gone by. Moisture-resistant MDF doesn't. It uses a different type of binder. So MRMDF is typically formaldehyde-free, which is interesting. Provided you're using MDF that's made to the correct ISO standards or whatever, then that's what the health and safety guidelines say. We'll dig out a link and put it in the show notes. But it is the binding agent that's the problem. It's not the MDF itself, because MDF is just, you know, wood dust basically, compressed and compacted.
So if it's ISO kind of certified or British standard or something like that, but then most of it's imported, isn't it? So how would it work if it's imported? Presumably it has to have some sort of...
It's an EU standard, so provided you're getting it from somewhere within the EU.
And presumably even if it's coming from outside the EU, it would have to meet those standards.
I would presume so. I don't actually know.
Interesting.
But again, it's easy. Again, as always, buy a proper branded product. Medite, Kronospan,
Kronospan,
whatever it is, Kronospan, Caber, you know, a known brand rather than the dirt cheap rubbish you get from a builder's merchants, and you'll be fine. I mean, all wood dust is hazardous. Take the usual precautions, of course.
Ironically, where I am, the only place I can get Medite easily is from the builder's merchant.
Well, there you go. Shows what I know.
And this is the thing. It's so... Where I am, the timber yard that I prefer to use is quite a hike away, and you'll have, if you've seen the video I did on buying wood from... And
yeah, I saw that.
If I've got quite a lot of stuff to get, or it's specialist, or I need it cut up, then I will take the drive out and go there. But for one sheet, for the odd sheet, it's just not worth it. And in which case they'll deliver. Getting it delivered cut then causes various other issues and stuff. I prefer if I'm getting it cut to pick it up.
Yeah.
If I just need like a quick sheet of ply or something like that, one of the big major box shifters who aren't getting a free shout out, right, especially in line of what they're doing on the trade side of things at the minute, which I think is diabolical. But so they're definitely not getting a shout out. But one of the major box shifters is my closest place that has a cutting service.
Okay.
So if I need to quickly pick up a sheet of ply that I can fit in my truck and I need it pre-cut, then that's pretty much my only option. And for Medite, the builder's merchant keep it in,
right?
Which is handy. But unfortunately, not the builder's merchant that's literally down the road.
It never is it?
They don't keep it in. It's the one south of the river. Same company, different branch. They're the only ones who keep the Medite in. But it's still it's doable at least. But it's one of these things. Maybe if anyone knows the scientific answer to burning scraps of MDF, does the poisonous stuff get burnt off in the burning process, or is it just point blank big no-no?
Yeah, or is indeed there poisonous stuff in the MDF in the first place? Well, that's a question for
Well, and that's another big topic.
It is.
And even if there is, does it leach out in sufficient quantities to cause a problem? You read a lot of stuff that says that MDF must be painted on all surfaces to stop nasty chemicals from leaching out of it. And is that based on any scientific fact, or is that just...
My guess would be not.
I would guess not, because you see an awful lot of professionally made furniture that isn't painted on all surfaces.
Yeah. Talking of professionally made furniture, that's actually a question I had on today, one of the topics for today, actually, just as a general thing. For fitted furniture, I have always, possibly slightly lazily, kept the unseen faces and edges unpainted, because it seemed like a lot of effort for something that's only ever going to be seen when it's ripped out. But I'm doing a study in a desk build at the moment, and they're sort of discrete pieces, but they are fitted. And one of them is a bed base and a tall set of shelves, a couple of tall sets of shelves, and a desk, like a long shelf, basically. And what made me think of this is, if the client sees the stuff coming into the house and half of it's unpainted, are they going to think, well, is that really worth the money? or should it all be looking nice all the way around, even though you're never, ever, ever going to see it once it's fitted? What do you do? Do you pre-paint, or do you paint stuff once it's in?
I don't generally paint surfaces that you can't see and that you never will see. Normally, I'll paint the underside edge, and I'll follow it round a little bit just so there's no...
Yeah, that's what I do, because it makes you feel better, doesn't it? Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah, and it's just so, even MDF, if it sits in water for a period of time, it will swell.
Oh, yeah.
So if someone spills something on the floor and water ends up sitting under the edge of the unit or something like that, there is a potential risk that it could swell up. So I do try and seal all the edges, even sometimes just with diluted PVA, but generally it'll just be sealed with the primer.
Yeah.
And I'll normally try and follow that all the way round just a little bit, just so that if anything does get spilt and it's sitting in it for a long period of time, that there's less risk of any kind of damage to it.
Yeah.
The MR obviously swells a lot less than standard.
Although it is moisture resistant, not waterproof. So it's
exactly.
If you put it in a bucket of water, or indeed have it sitting in water, or where there's ground contact with a damp surface, then of course it will take some of that on board.
Definitely.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I things like, if you've got an adjustable shelf, obviously you paint the front edge, the visible edge. Do you paint the the sides? Because that shelf's going to be taken out, and more of a philosophical question, really. I'm not really expecting an answer, but it's one of those sort of, what do you do? Do you do the sides and the back, even though it's never going to be seen, or only ever going to be seen once it's moved? And let's be honest, most people, when they have adjustable shelves, they find a position that they want to leave it in, and they leave it there, don't they? Once the shelves been adjusted, it tends to stay there.
I mean, what would it be in a kitchen unit? It wouldn't be edge banded down the edge of shelves.
No, they don't. Not generally.
So I don't think it's unreasonable to leave it as bare wood, because you're never going to see it, and it's probably going to cause less problems. I mean, is there a potential that if you've painted it and then fitted it and it's quite a tight fit, that it then gets stuck in that position? And
that's possible. We know how paint can get sort of soft and sticky when two faces meet.
Yeah, definitely, and it can take a good couple of weeks, even with water-based paints, to fully harden.
Yeah,
I mean, the water-based paints will be touch dry and manoeuvrable much quicker than the oil-based generally. But you still have to leave all paints for a period of time to harden. And I don't know, what do you find on that side in terms of how long?
Depends on the schedule. It's touch dry very quickly and generally recoatable quite fast as well, I find, with the water-based acrylics, especially the ones I'm using now. But it depends on the schedule. If I really need to, then I can get a second coat on the same day. But I do like to leave them for a couple of days before they're sort of stacked together. And even then, I try and separate them with a little bit of corrugated plastic. I've forgotten the Correx. A little bit of Correx between the faces.
I was going to ask actually about that, whether how you package stuff up, because presumably you've got stuff that has to, when it's getting sent off to be, not really when it's been sent off to be sprayed, but if you've finished it yourself and then it's getting delivered somewhere. Well,
both really. When I do these MDF tables and stuff for the interior design, and they get sent off to be sprayed in a high gloss finish, you've got to protect it somehow. You've got to wrap it up, because obviously you don't want the corners being dinged. It just goes off in a van, in a courier.
Yeah.
Off to be delivered. And I tend, what I've been doing is I just basically wrap it completely in Correx, in the corrugated plastic, so all the edges are protected and all the corners. So it is like a fully encased little thing,
right?
Which does take time, and that's one of the many things that has to be allowed for in the costings is the time taken for wrapping and shipping.
So do you buy in big sheets of the Correx then, or how do you do that?
Yeah, you can buy Correx. You can get it in a roll actually, but I just pick it up from my timber yard. Most timber yards or builders merchants or decorators merchants will sell it, usually with their logos printed on it. But the 2mm stuff, it's only a few quid a sheet. So I just, one of the tables, it's usually more than a sheet, just because of how it needs to be done, but not much more. So it doesn't really cost much.
Because you can use things like bubble wrap with maybe corner protectors and stuff like that. But
you can do, yeah. I mean, it's a whole. You can get this really thin closed cell foam as well. Yeah. But again, how much stuff do you want to stock?
Yeah.
I use Correx for all kinds of other things, for templating and whatever else. So I just as soon keep a few sheets of that in and use that for wrapping and delivering. And when it comes to wrapping and protecting stuff that I've painted that's going out to be installed, then I've got some moving blankets that I've bought from Amazon recently. They're really good, but surprisingly hairy, surprisingly bitty.
Is that the grey ones that are kind of multicoloured? It's got
the greyish sort of multicoloured ones. They're made of rubbish and just sewn together so they don't fall apart.
Yeah,
basically.
I don't know if it's like recycled materials or something. Yeah,
I don't know what it is. I don't want to know really. Yeah, about 20 quid for a pack of 5 or something from Amazon. So quite reasonable, although they're not very big. They're only 2 meters by 1.5. So the other thing I do is I've got a set of reasonably clean dust sheets, just regular drop cloth type dust sheets, which again are reasonably cheap and obviously multi-use. but I use those just to wrap the painted stuff to protect it.
Yeah, I've got hundreds of bed sheets from my mum's that, you couldn't really do. It's like, do I put them in the bin? Charity probably won't want them.
Yeah.
So I've kept a few more of those. They're always handy, but
well, handy for they're not super protective, but handy for putting in between.
Yeah,
painted
just
faces.
to protect stuff. Really,
and then maybe put a dust sheet around them. It's really the edges in particular that you want to watch. But also, if you get two faces that rub together, you can get sort of bad marking, and that always looks horrible on a big flat.
Yeah, and the trouble with bubble wrap and stuff like that is if it's a unit that's freshly painted, as I say, because the paint hasn't fully hardened, I'm always a little bit nervous. Even if it's
those little bubbles can leave like sucker marks.
Yeah, whether it's going to leave any marks and whether it's going to slightly stick to the paint until the paint's sat for a good couple of weeks to really harden off. So I'm not too keen on putting bubble wrap directly onto something that's only been painted like a day ago, and maybe wrapping it in craft paper first or something, and then putting bubble wrap.
I've been more nervous of the craft paper. I think I don't know. It's tricky.
I don't know. Craft paper doesn't seem to mark or stick in the same way that bubble wrap almost sticks a bit like cling film.
Yeah.
You know, it's got that kind of slight stickiness and but yeah, the Corex I think's a good idea. But yeah, interesting one. It's one of these challenges of how to get stuff shipped off and not damaged after all the careful work that's gone into making it, And one of these things that I've hoarded over the years is hundreds of corner protectors.
Ah, right. Yes, I've got a few of those.
But I never seem to have ones that are the right size for whatever project I'm doing.
Or even worse, you've got ones that came off a door, and as you're about to put it on, you realise it's still got staples in it. You go,
oh yeah,
terrible. What a nightmare.
So you've been on with your sprayer then, and you're back up and running with a Graco.
I've been back on with my sprayer. Got my sprayer back up and running. I mean, the little cheap H3LP is fantastic, but long-term use, the one that I have is giving out a lot of overspray, and I'm literally still wiping overspray off everything. Every time I pick up a clamp, it's got overspray on the top of it. So that was I didn't want to repeat that. And now, literally, I'd got the Graco to the extent where it was working really nicely, minimal overspray, absolutely fantastic. And then it died. So it's gone away. Had new internals fitted. Came back on Monday, and back to work starting yesterday. And so far so good.
Have they said what was wrong with it, or?
It's had a new pump basically. So, but no, they've not been forthcoming on exactly what the problem was. But anyway, I'm going to keep an eye on the throughput on it to see how much paint actually. I mean, it's a difficult one because I don't do that much painted stuff. I've been doing a lot more either bare wood to go off and be sprayed or birch ply stuff of late, and so you use it fairly intensely for a while, like I am now, and then it's going to sit idle for a few weeks or a month before it'll come out again. So I don't know if that sort of usage is particularly good for them. I don't know if they thrive being used more regularly but sparingly. I just don't know, to be honest. So we'll find out anyway.
But I've seen on your videos, you've been careful with it, and you're storing the tips properly, and you've run the cleaning fluid through. And
I thought so. Yeah, I've been. Yeah, but the cleaning it as per the instructions, using pump protector on it, pump guard on it. I'm just glad it went within the warranty period, and it can be fixed under warranty. So we'll see how it goes. The pumps are a replaceable part, but they're a couple of £100, so you don't really want to be replacing that every year.
No.
So we'll see. But anyway, the story so far, it is much more of a production machine than the cheap little HVLP that I had. It puts out a lot more paint. It covers a much greater, better span, better coverage. So it's faster to use. Oh God, it's so fast. Such a pleasure to have it back, I have to say.
I bet you.
And we'll see how it goes. But yes, it's certainly been put through its paces in the last few days.
When you would, you've used it for decorating, haven't you? For like emulsion.
Yeah, I used it on an inter room because it was for a big job I did earlier in the year. The clients wanted gloss on the walls, and I figured the best way to do that was I've tried roller and gloss, and it's okay, but it's not fantastic. So I sprayed it, which, you know, there are pros and cons. If you spray it, then it's very difficult to, if anything does need touching up afterwards, it's difficult to do. But it came out really well. It was very slow drying paint. It was a Benjamin Moore advanced water-based acrylic that has the drying time of an oil-based paint. Yeah. I don't know who asked for that, but apparently it's very, very nice paint. Great range of colours, but very slow to use for me. But yeah, it gives a really nice gloss finish, 85% sheen, which is pretty good.
And did you emulsion the ceiling with the sprayer then? Or?
I did, yep, did that as well.
How did you find doing a ceiling with it?
Absolutely fantastic. I think one of the first videos that I did in the series, I did a whole series of it was either the Playing at Spraying series, which was all about the spraying, or the Big Job series, which was, you know, sort of at the same time from earlier in the year. The ceiling was fantastic because, you know, if you paint a ceiling, I'm not a painter, but, you know, I do little bits of it. And with the benefit of hindsight, I wouldn't do both of these parts again. I'd do either the cabinetry for the job, or I would have done the painting, but not both. But doing the ceiling, because it was not particularly ornate, but it has plaster cornice work all around the edges and a big sort of ceiling rose in the centre, and they're always difficult to get to with a brush or roller. I did the whole ceiling in 15 minutes with paint straight from the can, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful finish. There are some pictures of this on my Instagram and also in my channel. We'll maybe put a link to those in the podcast description, in the podcast show notes. But it was a just exquisite finish, really, really beautiful, and so quick. However, you've got all the masking down, all the covering up.
But even then, I mean, we've been decorating our living room. Finally, we're in a new build, and we've been here for quite a long time now, and we've only just got round to starting to decorate. And I'm saying the royal we, Mrs. Mac did the lion's share of it, and bless her, she started on the ceilings, obviously, and
right.
It just sucked the paint up with it being a new build. And the ceiling was fine, you know, it didn't really need doing, but there was the odd little mark and stuff, and it's like, well, go on, if we're doing it, might as well give it another lick of paint. And honestly, it sucked the paint up so quickly. It took a whole day to roller the ceiling, just because it took so long, because it would be like, put a bit on, oh, the paint's gone, back down to the tray, to it, but another bit, back down to the tray, and it was really patchy and everything. And then I thought, it's not the best of paints that you use. And so I went out and got a better quality paint, white paint. So she gave another coat with this better paint. But this better paint was a very slightly different shade of white.
Of course it is.
So now, if you don't get absolute... So now really it needs 2 coats of this new paint, because the old paint is showing through. And eventually it was like, you know, you can't spend any... And she was getting really disheartened with it. And it's like, I said, look, we've got downlighters. You're never going to see it anyway. It's a spotlight lit room.
Yeah.
And it's something that we'll maybe sort at some point, but it was just...
Yeah, but you know perfectly well when the light comes in at a certain angle and the light and your ceiling lights are off, you'll see those differences, and they're absolutely maddening.
But eventually, after a full day on it, it was just like, you know, we need to crack on. You can't spend 2 days just doing the ceiling. You're gonna go insane. Even if you allowed pretty much half a day for prep, if it's only taking 15 minutes to do the painting, you're still ahead. I mean, I'm sure a professional decorator would have had it done much, much quicker, but in our instance. But it's hard, and especially with a roller and things, because it's hard on the arms and putting the kind of force on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've got to say the Graco isn't exactly a lightweight, especially when you've got a litre of paint in the pot as well. But towards the end of doing the walls, my right arm was definitely trembling a bit. I was sort of giving the pot a little bit of extra support underneath. But for the ceiling, it was okay. But yeah, you get used to it. You acclimatise or acclimate to it, don't you?
You do, and it's done. And we finally have a decorated living room ready for Christmas, which is nice. It looks like a grown-up living room instead of like just white walls, which is nice. Should we have a little break?
Yes, sure thing. You're going to tell us about somebody awesome, aren't you?
Let me introduce you to a brand new sponsor of the show. You may have seen their products featured on some of my videos. Metex make an amazing product called Corefix, and it's specifically designed for attaching heavy things to dot and dab walls. You'll be familiar with dot and dab if you've ever done work in a new build house in the UK. It's basically where the plasterboard's glued onto the solid wall with a special adhesive, and it's a fantastic way of dry lining homes. The problem though is that it creates a little gap between the plasterboard and the blockwork, and this can make hanging heavy things on dot and dab a little bit tricky. This is where the Corefix fitting comes into play. It looks a bit like a frame fixing, about 10 centimeters long, but it comes with a special steel core that gets hammered into the end of the plug, and it bridges that gap between the plasterboard and the solid wall. They're really easy to use and have been strength tested at over 1/4 of a metric ton. You'll see a video over on my Gosforth Handyman YouTube channel where, just for a laugh, I attach a really heavy plasma TV to a wall with just a single Corefix screw, and it held it no problem at all. I don't particularly advise doing that, but if you're in a trade where you regularly have to attach heavy things to dot and dab, such as big radiators, massive TVs, cabinets and all sorts of other things, this is a fantastic problem solver. Just visit corefixed.com, that's corefixed.com. There's a link in the show notes, or just pop onto Amazon and search for Corefix and you'll find them on there. Thanks again to Corefix by Metex for sponsoring this episode.
Talking about painting, we had a question from Jeff about painting MDF. He says, "Hello both, great show, keep up the good work." Thank you. Question about painting MDF end grain. Watching our YouTube videos, it's interesting to see how you both approach projects. And it says, Andy, if I'm right, uses a 50-50 PVA with water to seal the edges, but I don't do that.
No, I don't do that either.
You don't do that, okay.
No.
And have we ever protected a painted finish with a protective poly? I have, actually. Jeff says he hasn't worked with MDF at all, but he's about to make a cabinet, and watching our videos for at least a year has been excellent research. So thank you for that. No, I don't do... I mean, if you have a look on YouTube, there are about 1 million, probably more, videos about painting end grain MDF. And yes, we know MDF doesn't have end grain, but you know what we mean, the cut edges. I've never done anything special with it. I have, even back when I was doing the pre-spraying, when I was rollering, I would give it a single coat of water-based primer undercoat, and on the edges you'd then rub that back, denib it, and give it a second coat, and that's all I've ever done. You prep the edges thoroughly first, so I go down to sort of fairly low grits. Pre-spraying I was going down to about 240, and now I'm spraying, I go down to 320, just to make them as smooth as possible. But really all I do is prime it and paint it with a denib in between. Yeah,
and I'm more or less the same, although it's slightly different in terms of the very initial prep. And I've done a video specifically about my approach to painting the edge grain of MDF, or end grain, even though it doesn't have grain. The way I do it, I don't do any sanding until I've given it a coat of primer.
Oh, right. So let's get a bit of texture to it first. Okay.
So as soon as I've done all the cut edges, I try and get primer on as quickly as possible onto the cut edges and let that thoroughly dry. So I'll get on with everything else. This isn't anything to do with my final priming of the unit. This is purely to seal the edges.
Right.
And then I do the sanding. And I find it sands much, much better, because I find the primer raises the edge grain ever so slightly. Well, it depends on the MDF as well. Sometimes it can raise it quite a lot, but on MR it doesn't tend to raise it that much, but it can raise it a little bit. And I find if I prime it first, then sand it, and then do all of your final unit priming. And then if you need to, you can give the edge another prime after you've sanded it, but I find you don't really need to do that. So whether you sand first and then prime, or prime first and then sand, normally enough of the primer has sunk into the edge grain that you can go straight to final coat on that edge. But if you've had to sand a lot of it away, you know, if it's been more for, you know, getting two joints to line up perfectly and you've sanded quite a bit away, you might want to put a bit more primer on. But that's my approach. I don't do any sanding until I've put some primer on the edge, let it dry, then I sand, and then I do final coats. Interesting, isn't it?
I always put 2 coats of primer on the edges, just because it's particularly easy. Obviously, if you're doing a cabinet or a shelf or whatever else, you're going to prime both sides anyway. So you might as well include the front edge as well while you do the other side, as it were. So the edges always get a second coat of primer, and I do find that really helps. It really sort of just helps give a better edge for final top coat. Yeah.
And if you're denibbing between those coats of primer, you're going to get a perfect mirror smooth finish anyway. I think once you've got that first initial coat of primer that's really sealed the wood, and then when you denib prior to either a second coat or straight to top coat, whatever you're doing, you do get a really nice finish on the edge. I mean, it's to the point that you cannot tell the difference between the edge and the face. Yeah. You really can't. And if you are seeing a significant difference between the edge grain of your MDF and the face grain, I mean, I'm literally staring at it in front of me at the minute on on the shelf on my computer desk. There is genuinely no difference between the finish on the face and the finish on the edge. And if there is, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, your prep isn't good enough. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say try sealing the edge first. And you can use the PVA 50/50. That's fine. I have done that in the past. Normally, I'll only do that if I'm not painting it and I'm getting it ready for someone else.
Right.
Or say, for example, I want to get the edge perfect. Then sometimes what I'll do is put the PVA 50/50 mix on and let that dry and then give it a quick sand, and then maybe it's a project where I'm doing all the painting on site, for example. So if I'm doing all of the priming and everything like that on site, then what I might do is just get the edges sealed before going out. And if I'll just grab a pot of 50/50 PVA, seal the edges, and then I'll do everything else once I get to site.
Yeah.
But that's very rare. I have done that on one of my videos, which is probably, he might be where he's getting that from. But generally, just use the primer as a sealer for the edge.
Yeah. And again, I just use a water-based acrylic, Leyland, Johnston's, Dulux, Wick's own brand. I've never found any difference between any of them other than a slight difference in colour. And they do the job perfectly well. I know people swear by Zinsser Bin, which is a great primer, sealer, stain blocker, but the shellac-based one, I've never found it necessary to use on MDF edges or anything else, to be honest. One thing I do though, just very quickly, is you said about where MDF is in ground contact and might be in a damp environment like a bathroom maybe or a kitchen. You can actually use a wood hardener, which I found works quite well. Which is the sort of thing you use for repair work of rotting windows or whatever else. Just a little tub of wood hardener, solid dry in an hour, and then that makes it a sort of it soaks into the fibres and it makes it kind of an acrylic base. It's a really good basis for painting, but I wouldn't do that as a out of the box general purpose idea.
Is that water based or oil based or
no? It stinks, so it's some kind of spirit based. Yeah, disposable brush with those, definitely. I had a good question as well. It actually came in through my Patreon, but I think it's worth having a quick chat about it, which is about Frank asked, do you have any tips or pointers for sources for the design of built-in shelves and cabinets, things like proportions, dimensions, standard depth for drawers. Do you set the shelves back from the uprights or make them flush? That kind of thing. He says, loves watching our videos, and with enough patience and a bit of practice and lots of head scratching, he can probably overcome it. But design is one of the things that you've got to get right from the beginning. And my response to that was, a lot of the things that I make are going into an existing property where you've got to pick up the design cues like height of door handles, proportion, all that kind of thing has to come from what's already there. It's tricky because I don't really make things completely from scratch that are going to be freestanding and in their own right. Things like, fireplaces or existing cabinetry, or even, I don't know if you do this, but if I'm putting a wardrobe into a bedroom, I try and match the height of the doorknob to what's already there, unless it's obviously stupidly wrong.
Yeah, and it's like trying to match mouldings and things like that. If you're doing kind of more Victorian style stuff, and generally I'll always try and match the mouldings if I can. Normally, it's relatively easy to match the mouldings, if nothing else, just by building up a stack of other mouldings. Normally, you can get off the shelf stuff.
Yeah, you can stack them together to make something similar.
Once it's painted and finished, you would never know, and not to the point of getting custom cutters made or anything like that. But
no.
Although that is a service that my timber yard does very, very well, and they have a matching service for bespoke skirtings and baseboards and things, and they will be able to match pretty much any profile. They've got a big industrial shaper machine,
but you've got to have a few miles of that run through to make it worthwhile, I think, don't you, for that sort of for the costs involved?
Well, they'll do custom shaped skirting cheaper than that and just buy normal skirting.
Really?
They don't charge very much extra for it.
Wow.
So it's in the scheme of things, it's not expensive. As long as they're not having to get custom cutters done, but they can do it so quick.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
They can do it so quick on their big industrial shaping machines.
On the spindle.
But if you compare the price of going to a box shifter and getting a similar size, like a big 10-inch skirting or something, you'll get your eyes taken out at the box shifters for that sort of stuff, because they have to keep relatively low quantities of it in stock, and you pay, and that's, your timber merchants can be a great source for that.
Yeah,
and they'll
absolutely.
sometimes be able to do it custom made to order and things.
What about things like setting shelves? Let's say you do an alcove unit, you've got a base cabinet, you've got a set of shelves above it. If it's not the chunky floating shelves, if it's more of a regular bookcase, what about setting the shelves? Do you set them back slightly? Do you have them flush?
It really depends on the project. Normally, I always try and set it back, because the wall will never be perfect, and unless you're in a brand new house trying to get it flush to match up with the edge of the chimney breast, you'll always see the join, unless you're putting a framework around it of some description.
And what about things like, but you've got the bookcase, and the sides of the bookcase come down to the cabinet, and obviously the top is going to be the same depth as the sides. What about the shelves then? Do you sit those flush to the sides, or do you set those back a little bit?
I'm trying to hold on. Describe that again.
Okay, so you got a bookcase, with, let's say, three shelves in. Mm-hmm. You got the fixed sides and top.
So is this sitting on top of a lower alcove unit type thing?
So it's sitting on top of a low. Yeah, let's take that as an example. Yeah. For the shelves, do you make the shelves flush with the front edge of the sides, or do you set those back a little bit?
Again, it depends on the project, because I've had some where they want to run LED lighting around.
Right.
And I've had to run a channel and access around the inside edge and allow enough clearance that you can get an LED strip all the way round on the inside. But then you have to consider how is it going to attach, because if it does have a gap, then it can no longer attach onto the front of the shelves.
Exactly.
So generally it's going to be easier if I can attach them onto the front of the shelves, but then that's going to rule out being able to run any strip lighting around it and things like that. So I normally wouldn't leave a gap. unless it's for a specific reason. What about you?
I generally, because you've got the sides, and usually when I put an alcove unit in, the bookshelf part has a fixed shelf at whatever height, usually, between 400 and 500 mil, so you can put a telly on it or a vase of flowers or whatever else. So I put the fixed shelf in flush with the sides of the bookcase, same as the top. And then if there are adjustable shelves, I generally set those back slightly. And
then that makes it a bit easier to move them as well.
Yeah.
That they're not getting wedged against the front face. Yeah, I've done it that way as well. I think it just depends on the project.
No, again, these are the many and varied sort of design decisions that you come up with almost without thinking, that when you're first doing this, they can really be a bottleneck, can't they? Because there are just so many of these to think about, so many of them to come to terms with.
There's just so many different scenarios, and it's like things as well, like on your lower unit, do you run your skirting? Because if you're putting skirting around the lower alcove unit, do you run it at the same height as the existing skirting, or do you drop it down?
Depends on the skirting.
And again, it depends on the skirting, because sometimes you can have really high skirt, and sometimes it doesn't even have to be that high, but it just doesn't look right, because then you're going to have your doors much higher, so that it doesn't hit the skirting, and then your doors end up looking unusually high. So it's all these things, and most of the time it's done by eye, to be honest. I always put it together on SketchUp for myself, and have a good look around it, and to be honest, if I didn't do that, and you plan it out as well, and you work through the job in your own head at that point, and 90% of the problems that you're going to run into, I run into while I'm putting the design together. I would hate to think how long the project would take if I didn't do that design phase at the start. Because that's what most of the time when I'm doing, it's like, oh, I can't get access to that bit.
Yep.
I can't do that, so I'm going to have to attach it in a different way. And you're making all these decisions before you've cut a single piece of wood.
Yeah, absolutely. Because those are when you've got to make those decisions, because if you're making those decisions after you start cutting, this ends in misery. Don't ask us how we know that.
I think there are quite a lot of people who will just go straight to the cutting and installing without...
Make it up as you go along, yeah.
Yeah, other than maybe a sketch, but I find doing the detailed design is, even if it takes half a day, it'll probably save me a week of scratching my head. And
me too. That's why I do the drawings that I do. They're not really client drawings. They're for me.
Yeah,
they're for me to get a good sense of how it looks, of the proportion, and how it's laid out, and making sure that exactly that kind of thing, that the doors don't start looking silly or squatty if you do design the alcove cabinet, say, to have the skirting wrapping around like that.
And a little tip as well, when you're doing your measuring up.
Hey, ka-ding.
When you do the measure up the whole room, or everything, including, the chimney breast width, measure things that aren't necessarily anything to do with the furniture you're making, but even like the ceiling height.
Yep.
If it's got a picture rail, what height that's at.
Yep.
And include all of that on your design, because that will, when you're putting the design together, you will start scratching your head and thinking, is that gap between the top of the unit and the ceiling going to look unusual, or should I maybe run the whole thing right all the way up to the ceiling? And depending on the units, it's very difficult to make those decisions if you don't have the full dimensions of the room.
Yeah, the full dimension, the full proportions of the room. I do exactly the same thing, and I've got a checklist, which I'm sure you have too, that you go through when you do measure up.
Yeah.
Where you take the height of the skirting, the floor to ceiling, floor to cornice, to the coving, to the plasterwork, dado rail or chair rail, picture rail, whatever else is in there, fireplace, size and width of the chimney breast, size and proportion of the fireplace, height of the, completely blanked on the name of fire mantle, thank you, height of the mantle, all that sort of stuff, because it affects how it looks. And then I do a full, that wall view to scale, so that you have both alcoves, the chimney breast, and everything in there to see just how it looks, especially if you're putting a pair of alcove units in, obviously, and doubly, especially if you've got to put a pair of alcove units in, but at different times. I've had that sometimes where people are saying, "Oh, yeah, we'd like to do 2, but we can only afford to do this one now, and we want to do the other one in 4 months' time," or
Absolutely.
whatever. Okay.
And things like as well that I've had on jobs where maybe there's a picture rail going all the way round, and what do you do with that picture rail once you've got the alcove unit in? If the alcove unit isn't going all the way up to the ceiling.
Yeah.
And I've had ones where I've had to carefully remove the picture rail from the back inside of the alcoves, fit everything in, and then fit the picture rail along the front and seamlessly match it in on the top edge of the alcove units.
Such a professional.
And that takes forever, trying to take the picture rail off without damaging it. Bearing in mind, this might be 100-year-old picture
Absolutely,
rail.
and they're always whacked in with those big cut nails as well, aren't they?
Yeah, and then refitting it along the top of the unit. But it can look really good, but it depends on the room. In some rooms, that just won't look right.
Yeah.
But in other rooms, it just looks fantastic. It looks like the alcove unit's been there from the day the house was built, because the picture rail is 100-year-old and it follows all the way around the alcove unit. But yeah, it's all these things that are behind the scenes where when people whinge on about how much jobs cost, it's all these considerations that take time, and the planning and the measuring up on its own is takes a while. And it's all this stuff that you don't really see, but hopefully it'll result in a project that looks good and will last another 100 years.
That's right.
Plus at the end of it. But it's an interesting topic that you could talk about for a long time. Things like standard widths of your rail and stiles on panel doors and all of that.
Hang on a minute, there are standard widths? What?
No. Right, and again, I mean...
Thank goodness for that. I've been doing it wrong for 20 years,
I normally start off with maybe like 100 mil.
Right.
And then I'll shove that in SketchUp and see how it looks, and then you'll maybe put it together and it's like, they look a bit fat, and I'll try 80, or sometimes you'll go for the 80, and in certain rooms it just looks too skinny. And
I've standardised on 80 as a starting point, but I've gone as low as 60, I think.
Yeah.
And as fat as 100 for regulars. I go up to 150 for the bottom rail of wardrobe doors and that sort of thing, provided they're tall enough and if they have a centre rail.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, 80 mil rail and style is my standard sort of starting point for the kind of doors in the kind of sizes that I make.
And I think that's the key thing, is pick a number that you're happy to start with, put it into the design, and does it look right? Does it look in proportion with the property and with everything else that's going on? And it's an interesting topic in its own right. And we got quite a lot of follow-up on, well, we've got a huge amount of follow-up on the apprenticeship side of things.
Yes, I saw some of that.
Which is awesome, and thank you so much to everyone who dropped us a note. We have a brand new little contact form on the website, so you don't need to remember the email address anymore. You can just go onto the contact form and send us a note through that at measuringuppodcast.com. But we got a lot more feedback about NVQs, diplomas, apprenticeships in the UK, and also a couple of comments from overseas and how things are done in Australia and other parts of the world, and really, really interesting. The general consensus, I think, is that it's different everywhere. There was no two emails that matched up, and there doesn't seem to be a standard way of doing things, which is fine, and it's kind of good to know that.
Yeah.
There was a very interesting mail that we got from someone, I'll not mention his name, but they did an apprenticeship, not in joinery, but back in the early 2000s, and he's a young gay man, and he had... he was worried about getting some hassle from his colleagues when he came out and all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And he was very young, still a teenager, and he decided to come out at work, and he got absolutely destroyed by his colleagues over it, and I just thought it was tragic. And I thought by the early 2000s we'd come out of all that sort of nonsense.
Yeah.
But it was to the point that his boss held a vote asking his colleagues whether or not he should be allowed to stay working for the company.
Yep, whether or not he should be sacked. That was the first thing the guy did. It just beggars belief, to be perfectly honest. I read that, and just extraordinary. And in fact, this chap, even though he's relatively young, decided to call that a day fairly quickly and moved on elsewhere. And although he didn't get the same sort of level of frankly, abuse at his other workplace, it wasn't plain sailing. And he said that by talking about this, that's the only way we can sort of move things forward a little bit, and hopefully nobody else goes through that sort of nonsense these days.
I sincerely hope things have moved on. Coming up to, 2019.
20 years into the 21st century, correct?
20 years into the 21st century. It's scary. And I really, but I thought things like that had disappeared around the 2000s, but clearly not. Awful way to be tread, and but hopefully stronger from it, and it sounds like things have worked out for the better anyway.
Yes,
karma
indeed.
So loads of really interesting mails we've had from people. We'll draw a line under it for now. We'll continue to do our own bits of background research
because it is fascinating, but as you say, the general consensus of opinion is that there's doesn't seem to be any really right way to do this. With regards to the whole sort of NVQ level 1, level 2, level 3 is remains fairly confusing, I think, doesn't it?
It does, and how long apprenticeships last doesn't seem to be particularly conclusive. Lots of people saying 1 year and lots of people saying 5 years and everything in between as well. So I think it just depends on presumably where you end up getting your apprenticeship in the first place. But it is definitely an interesting topic, and we will follow up on it at a later date, and if as and when we hear anything else about it,
we'll talk more about that.
But we'll draw a line under it for now. If you need it to get a job, do it. If you're young and can easily go to college and do an apprenticeship, do it.
Yep.
If you're older and it's going to be difficult to do it and you think you can survive without doing it, then I wouldn't worry about it too much, unless you want to particularly work on a building site or somewhere that you've got to have that tick in the box.
Where you have to have it, where you actually have to have the qualification. But certainly not if you're going to be getting involved with the sort of work that we do anyway. I don't think the qualifications are the formal qualifications are really necessary. I did have one great question that came in. And forgive me, I'm just going to find it quickly. Message came in through my comments on YouTube. And the chap said that he's a self-employed carpenter and he's trying to get out of the house bashing side of things and more into the sort of fitted furniture, cabinetry sort of thing that we do. And because he's been self-employed for a while, but because he's been doing carpentry work, he hasn't really had the face-to-face contact with customers before. And he had a customer who contacted him to get a quote for some fitted furniture. And they were over an hour away and involved crossing a toll bridge. And he said, well, it's not really an area he covers. If the customer wants him to do a quote, he'd have to charge them his expenses. And surprise, surprise, never heard from them ever again. And he just asked my opinion of it. Is that something you've ever done? Have you tried charging for quotes or charging expenses for when you go out to do an estimate?
It's crossed my mind, but I've never done it.
Yeah, me neither.
I think it opens up a whole can of worms. I can see why people would want to do that. I can really see why, because and we'll chat about this in the after show a bit, because I've got a corker of a comment that's worth chatting about.
Just to interrupt quickly, you can join us on the after show by supporting us through Patreon at patreon.com/measuring up podcast.
$1.
$1 is all it takes.
$1, and that gives you access to not only the after show from today, but all of the previous after shows you'll have access to.
Indeed.
And if you want to keep listening, $1 a month, less than £1. But $1 would do it. And if you're not happy with it, then just cancel it.
As if anybody would not be happy with it. Anyway, I apologise. I interrupted you. Yeah. So charging for quotes, charging for estimates, it's not something I've ever done. And things like expenses, out-of-pocket expenses, obviously my main one is parking. Parking is just part of life, unfortunately, and I'm sure it is for you too, Andy. But what I generally do is I will always give somebody a ballpark idea of cost first, so we know that we're in the same kind of playing field. Alcove unit, it's going to be a typical alcove unit is in the region of whatever, 1,200 quid, 1,400, 900, whatever it is. Just give them a general idea of what it costs for a standard size with panel doors on soft close hinges but no drawers, for a set of bookcases with one fixed shelf and 3 adjustable. However you do it, however you word it, you tie it up enough so that they have an idea of what their job is going to cost. And generally speaking, if that's too high, they don't want to get you in for a formal quote.
Yeah.
And that's the time, once they've decided that that's okay, that's the time then when I'll go in, do a measure up, and do possibly drawings or come up with an actual proper guide, a proper estimate of costs for them.
And what I'll sometimes do, if it's a job that I really don't want to go out to because it's either at a time that I can't make it, or it's an awkward place to get to, or it's just miles away, but it sounds like a job that I might be interested in doing, then what I'll normally do is just get them to send us some photos and get them to do a very rough measure up. And sometimes that'll be enough that I can knock together a reasonable quote. And then if they're happy, then I'll say, right, deposit time, I'll do accurate measuring up.
Yep.
If the accurate measuring up is going to result in the price being radically out from what I've quoted, I will give you a deposit back and will not go ahead.
Yep.
But providing it's still in the same ballpark, you don't get that deposit back. That is going to cover my time for doing an initial design and things like that.
Yeah.
And then from there we'll progress with the job. That's generally kind of how I do things. But
yeah,
if it's that far away, it's generally got to be a very, very, a portfolio level job for us to want to do it, because it's so problematic having to travel backwards and forwards to the workshop if you've either left something or you want to do a particular type of cut that's going to be awkward to do on site, and you just think, how much quicker would that be to do in the workshop? It's
difficult when you're sort of starting out or starting to get into that sort of level of fitted furniture. You end up chasing jobs that you wouldn't necessarily want to do in other circumstances, because you want to get into that kind of work. But I suspect that's probably one that's best let go than followed up too closely.
It opens a can of worms of, like, how do you, if they've paid for this quote and then you come out and give them a sky high quote, are they going to potentially say that they want the money back because they're not happy with the quote? And it just opens up this can of worms that it's very difficult to police, even from a legal standpoint. It's like, how do you put a set of T's and C's around such a vague service? And I think you just have to absorb it, really.
Yeah. Well, to be clear, those costs, the clients do end up paying those costs. They just probably don't realise it, because you build those costs into your
day rate,
daily rates, the fees that you charge, the same as you do for the drawings or putting the quote together or whatever it is. You allocate time for that within the fees that you charge to cover all those sort of eventualities. So it's not a visible line item on your invoice, but it's definitely there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely
You've got
there.
to cater for that in your, as you say, in your day rate. It's part of your running costs of the business. You're not charging a day of work for going out, but your day rate has already catered for the fact that a certain number of days a year is going to be spent going out and quoting for people. And that's when people see high day rates, they're not thinking about YouTube comments. We'll come to it in the after show.
Yeah, absolutely. I include parking in my day rate, in my daily rates as well, because it always feels like penny pinching to put it in as a line item on top of everything else. I just added 20 quid to the day rates just to even things out and tidy things up. I don't refer to it specifically, but it's all there. It's all.
You've got to, and if you don't cater for all these things, you won't make any money, and you'll be gone very quickly.
Yep. And making money is the whole point of business. People seem to forget.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're 1 hour 20 already.
Well, good show. Good show. We are an hour and a half already. Goodness. Thank you for listening, everybody.
I haven't even got the chance to mention that I've got my new workshop lights in.
Whoa! Well done.
But I haven't quite finished. I ordered another 2. I've got the first 6 in, and it's amazing. Wow.
They are bright.
They're so bright. The 6 would be fine. Because you were saying you've got 9 now?
I've got 9, yeah, but almost my whole ceiling is covered in those lights. It is bright.
That must be really bright.
Yeah, it's lovely. Shows up all the muck and rubbish.
Yeah, it'd be amazing. For filming, it's just awesome.
Actually, 2 of the early panels that I've got are starting to go. The colour's starting to shift on them.
What, going more yellow or?
Going sort of magenta, actually.
Really? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, very strange. So I've got to dig those, get the. When I have a minute, of course, I've got to get those down and have a look and see what's going on.
I must admit, I'm for 20 quid each on it. They're so cheap. It's not the end.
I'm not going to try and claim on a warranty to use now.
Yeah, so I bought an extra 2, which I'm going to shove in, and then that's that done and dusted. And but yeah, massive difference. Really, really pleased with those. I can't wait to actually get working in the shop now. They're up.
Yeah, I found for video it helps just to put a little bit of diffuser over them. So I just got a nylon sort of material that goes over the face of them, just to soften it out a little bit.
I'm going to see how they go. I'll shoot a couple of videos in it and kind of get used to it, the new lighting. And
what I found with fluorescence was because it's a tube that was effectively hanging, the light would come out from all around it, so you get quite a lot of reflected light off the ceiling and the upper parts. Whereas with the LEDs, it's just straight down.
Yeah.
So it's quite direct. So a little bit of diffuser really helped. It really softened it.
Although no shadows, which is really weird.
It is a bit. They are there, but it's very soft. Yeah.
Yeah, like I was really surprised about that. I've done a little video about them, which I'm not sure when it'll be out. I need to finish the job, and then I'll add a little bit of footage onto the end of the video. But yeah, you'll see where I'm standing at the bench, and it's like I've got a light directly above us, and I'm holding my hand above the bench, and there's a tiny bit of a shadow, but not much. And it's
not
like,
much,
wow, that's amazing.
Pretty wild. Yeah, I must put some more up in my other half of the workshop, the storage side, actually, because it's I've still got the fluorescents in there, and they're pretty nasty.
Yeah. Well, the ones I had up were the high frequency batons, so they're not true fluorescent, so they don't give off a bad light. They're just not a very predictable colour temperature. That was the biggest problem with them. Yeah. So they're going to go in my other side, the kind of garage side, and that'll do, just so I can use them, because they're only a couple of years old. They've got some life left in them yet. But
yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap it up for today.
I think we need to thank our wonderful Patreon supporters, all those fabulous people who support the show through Patreon, and you can support the show as well through patreon.com/measuringuppodcast. In particular, we'd like to thank Douglas Deal, Thistledew, Brendan from the Shades Workshop, Tim Bowers, Nick Fajardo, Adrian Millington, Chris Davidson, Paul Gardner, Eddie Carroll, James Hewitt, Carl Pountney from the Strawbite Workshop, Steve Avery, Peter Tone, Owen Bullock, Tony Cornell, Adam Padley, Chris Mark Duthie and Max Weitz.
And we'd also like to thank Mark Duff, Ben Harker, Harry Capper, John T. Lynch, Duncan, Chris Stokesmore, Ben Campbell at the Colonel Collective, Jason Williams, Wilson Chan, Kevin Steer, Dominique, Andy Farmer, Randall Davis, David Chisnell, Kevin Miller, Piece of Timber, Jim Hooper and Andrew Marnell.
What a fine bunch of people, and thank you so much for supporting the show. We'll be getting on to the after show very soon, and you'll be listening into that as well, I'm sure. Thank you so much for listening. If you have the opportunity, please do take the time to rate us on iTunes and possibly even give us a review, because the reviews and ratings on iTunes really do help push us further up the stack, and further up the stack is where we want to be. You can post feedback to us at Measuring Up PC on Twitter or at Measuring Up Podcast on Instagram, and you can email us through measuringuppodcast.com and using the contact form there. I'm Peter Millard from 10minuteworkshop.tv on YouTube, and Andy?
I'm Andy MacLellan from Gosforth Handyman on YouTube. Thank you once again for listening. It's been a genuine pleasure. We'll see you on the after show, patreon.com/measuringuppodcast.
And we'll see you next time. Take care.
See you later.